We have breaking news. A gunman with automatic weapons opening fire from the 32nd floor of Mandalay Bay.
159 is coming from the Mandalay Bay is coming out a window.
You are listening to Hidden Truth, Las Vegas Shooter with Jim Breslow. Find us at hiddentruthshow.com and follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Hidden Truth Show. Here's Jim Breslow.
I spoke with Tim Bedwell, who is running for Clark County Sheriff against the current Sheriff, Joe Lombardo. What most people do not realize is that the shooting actually did not take place in Las Vegas. The Mandalay Bay, and in fact the entire Vegas Strip, is technically not in the city of Las Vegas. It is unincorporated land in Clark County. But the police department responsible for the Strip is called the Las Vegas Metro Police Department and is headed by the Clark County Sheriff. The election is every 5 years, with the next one taking place in November.
Okay, we're really thrilled to have on the line here Tim Bedwell. First, we want to thank you, Tim, for your service. Tim served for 20 years in the Marines and over 20 years in law enforcement, so an exemplary record of service to our country and to our people both in law enforcement in Arizona and in Las Vegas.
Thank you, Jim. Good morning, and many thanks for saying that. You humbled me. That's so nice. Thank you.
So I watched your press conference a couple weeks ago when you first announced that you're going to run against Sheriff Lombardo, and you did note that October 1st in the Las Vegas shooting played a role in your decision to run. So I have a lot of questions to ask you about as far as that decision and how that motivated you. But I also picked up in the press conference that a family friend actually died at the event. So I want to say my condolences for that. And obviously this October 1st shooting touched you very personally and deeply.
Right. Well, you know, we do have our adult son actually had several victims that were friends of his, and a close friend was one of the fatalities. And of course, because of my law enforcement connection, there were people there that I knew, and there were people that responded that I know. And yeah, it was a terrible night for the country and certainly for Las Vegas.
Bedwell originally made the decision to run for sheriff last year. In the aftermath of the shooting, however, he thought it may be disloyal to do so. But when he saw how poorly Lombardo was handling the investigation, everything changed.
You absolutely can't give out information that you're a week later going to say was wrong and then give some other story, because it never gives people peace of mind.
You're referring to the timeline?
Well, not only the timeline. I mean, the sheriff was quoted as saying that, and I think I'm very close to the quote, but he said something along the lines of, you know, our officers, we found out there was a person on the 35th floor, and or 32nd floor, and officers responded there and engaged the suspect, and he is currently dead. That is very clear, saying that police officers confronted him, and as the result of the conversation, he's deceased. It turns out now that the ruling is that Paddock committed suicide, and that shots fired in the room were accidental discharge by a SWAT team member, for which there is even some controversy there, because there is apparently three brass casings that are connected to the officer who had the AD's weapon, but in some places it's being said that he had one accidental discharge. Now, I've trained. I'm a police full auto weapon instructor. I carried full automatic weapons since I was 17 when I was in Marine Corp boot camp, and my supposition is that this was probably a 3-round burst from either a select fire 3-round burst option or a full auto option that he terminated with 3 rounds. Either way, that should be clarified, and regardless of what clarification there is for the officers shooting, it should have never been described as an encounter that resulted in Paddock's death, and then later changed to being just an AD with a suicide. That information should have absolutely been vetted as truth before the sheriff got up and said it.
Well, when you get conflicting stories, it causes the public to wonder which one is correct.
That's right. It does.
And to that point, can you rest assured today that the revised story is in fact the correct story on any of these questions?
Yeah, then that's a valid question, and I'm not privy to the investigation. I don't know the specifics of what happened, but I can say that even in my mind, and I'm not a police conspiracist. I don't usually buy into things that are conspiracies around police departments, although there are some that clearly have turned out to be, bad things with police agencies. But to your question, no, I think the public has an absolute right to have these questions answered. And I'll tell you right now, at this point in this campaign, one of my number one goals is to make a campaign for sheriff the place where the sheriff is going to have to answer these questions.
Yeah, let's talk about the timeline. That has been the most obvious error, it seems to me, and that was that the sheriff first reported that it was actually this security guard, Jesus Campos, who intervened and caused Paddock to stop shooting. Then he revises that and says that actually Campos intervened or encountered the shooter 6 minutes before the shooting even began, which caused everyone to wonder, well, gee, if he was shot 6 minutes before, how come there wasn't a better response time? And then it's revised yet again to say that no, Campos was shot 1 minute after the shooting started, and that's in the most recent police report.
Yes, and I think the original timeline had Paddock shooting Campos through the door at just like a minute before 10, so like 9:59. And 6 minutes later, the shooting into the crowd began. So that 6 minutes was pretty much the mantra of the early press conferences. It was, within 6 minutes after firing through the door at the security guard, he began firing into the crowd. So, and then it was approximately 50 minutes when officers were at the door, and another 25 minutes or so before the SWAT team breached the door, which makes it a significant amount of time. And, time is important in this. And I think everyone deserves to know what the actual proven timeline is. If it looks bad for the response, then the response needs to be better. But we can't change the timeline to make it convenient. And even in our most recent school shooting in Florida, the timeline is absolutely critical. When somebody has 2 minutes to shoot, or in the case of October 1st, many minutes to shoot under any timeline, he wasn't interrupted from the time he began firing until a half hour or an hour later. We need to make that better.
Let's go back to the timeline and the amount of time that it took for the police to breach the door. It was approximately 1 hour after he stopped shooting when the police finally knocked down the door and found him. Still some dispute as to whether or not he was found dead or not at that time. But the fact that it took an hour, that seems an inordinate amount of time. I believe Lombardo's explanation was, well, he had stopped shooting, so we felt at that point, the police felt that they could be more methodical in going to the room. But boy, that sure strikes me as a huge risk, because you don't know when he would have started shooting again. And the moment he started shooting again, people die.
Yes, and I wasn't there. It's hard to Monday morning quarterback people. I saw the sheriff's response to that question, and he did say that they decided to slow things down because the gunfire had stopped. And I can tell you from being, I was in charge of embassy security at 3 different embassies overseas for 5 years when I was in the Marine Corps. So I have a very extensive close quarter battle history of training and experience. And I've also been on the SWAT team in both the Yuma County Sheriff's Office and the Gilbert, Arizona Police Department. And I can tell you that I don't know the facts. I haven't seen the report, but I can tell you that the people on the door, the breachers on the door in that first stack, somebody had to ask them to stop. because when you're going to a threat that extensive, the hardest thing to do is to pull them back. And the reason for that has been proven just recently in Florida. Police officers, ever since not long after Columbine, have been taught to go to the threat, and if you go by yourself, God bless you, and fight smart, because you got to end these things. And now the idea that he had stopped, Jiminy Christmas, people were recognizing this as fully automatic weapon fire, even though it was bump stock, and people that know the difference can hear it in the sound. Most people thought, and not only did people think these were fully automatic weapons being shot into the crowd, everybody knew that it was a very high mass casualty event. So to wait, was the potential of waiting for a whole nother phase. And again, I wasn't at the door, but I'll tell you, my experience of people waiting to go in a building or go into a room in an HRT situation or to stop a threat of some sort, it's hard to pull them back. So if that decision was made at the door by people on the scene, so be it, and God bless them, they made the decision they did. But you know what? In training going forward, that's not what they should do. And we need to learn from that, and we need to go to that threat. And here's one other thing on that before you'll have another question, but I want to say this. Positive outcomes reinforce bad tactics. So the fact that he didn't continue shooting or resume shooting sometime while they were stacked doesn't, if he would have and they'd have killed one person, everybody would say, well, they should have went in the door. Well, the point I'm trying to make is they should have went in the door anyway. And if that was a command decision not to, then command needs to go back to training.
And how shocking is it to you that there could be two stories about what they discovered when they came in? Under one story, it was perhaps the police that shot him. On the other is that when they breached the door, they observed Paddock kill himself. That was there was testimony to that effect in a search warrant. And then the ultimate story that's out now that when they walked in, he was already dead on the floor from suicide.
Well, I know from experience with investigations like this that you can get timelines different. You can get the order of things and how they occurred and exactly what people saw different. And people do see things different. You can have two people that witnessed the exact same event from 2 or 3 feet different and ask them about it an hour later and they saw something different. Ask them about it 24 hours later and it might even have changed again. But these are issues that should have been pinned down to fact before they were related to the public. And so if Paddock committed suicide, then I don't know why the sheriff would be on the record standing up at a press conference, a prepared press conference. He wasn't ambushed by the media, and say, we heard the guy was on the 32nd floor. Our officers engaged him, and he's currently deceased. So to me, that's an engagement. An engagement means you shot him. It doesn't mean you went in and watched him shoot himself. It doesn't mean you went in and he was already dead. An engagement involves your officers firing or having some other physical contact with the person or using some other, electric discharge weapon. But an engagement is what it is. It's an engagement. So to say that and then try to back down from that with, no, we went in and he committed suicide when we came through the door, and then to come back later and say, no, he'd already been dead for, the hour that we were stacked. It's bad communication.
Has
and
anyone?
If nothing else, it could be much more.
Has anyone been disciplined for providing false information?
Not to my understanding, and I don't know that they would. Tell anyone anyway. They would probably stand on the personnel actions are private and not release that information. And I think that's something you have to consider. But in certain circumstances, there's the potential that you need to be forthcoming. Maybe not tell who if there's a privacy issue, but I think they need to at least say what now that they look back in retrospect. And let me be clear, I'm not saying officers should be punished for a decision they made with the circumstances that they had at the time when we Monday morning quarterbacked them. But if they didn't do what's correct and accurate under the training they were given, then that's an issue. or if leadership told them to do something other than what standard practice should be, then the leadership should be disciplined. But more importantly than discipline, it needs to be changed. It needs to be clear. This is a repeatable incident. This was a Nevadan, a Clark County resident, killing mostly Clark County residents and others visiting Clark County in Clark County. And it has to be prevented. We have to prevent this ever happening again. This is a county issue. This is not like hijacking airplanes in one state and flying into a building in another state where the cops don't have any control over fixing that. That's a federal government responsibility. The federal government can't protect against this. This is our responsibility as Nevada law enforcement. We have to fix this.
According to the most recent police report, Campos reported that he had been shot on the 32nd floor. Yet the police responded, I believe it was to the 31st floor, and appears to have been on that floor for quite some time. Do you have any explanation as to what the confusion was there and why the police wound up on the wrong floor?
Well, herein lies, I think, a big part of the problem. When Campos went up there, the 32nd floor had been barred. So Paddock had fixed the doors so they couldn't be opened from the fire stairs. So Campos, I believe, went up one floor more and came down, and to get and came out and then came down either the elevator or whatever. So he had to go another way to get into the 32nd floor because the doors had been tampered with. Now, in my opinion, security on the strip should adamantly be practiced, preached, and told, and it should never vary from this. If they encounter a place, a door, a fire door in one of their hotels that has been tampered with so that it can't be opened, they should call the police right then. That shouldn't be something that you wait and go investigate unarmed by yourself. That should have been relayed to security in the hotel, and the hotel should have called Metro right then to say, we have a situation evolving, and they should have dispatched more security officers, preferably armed, to go up there and investigate. But at the same time, Metro should know we can't wait the extra minutes it takes. Once we find something that nefarious, that has to be reported. And so to answer your question, my belief is that Campos is on the record that he encountered a barricaded door and had to find another way to the floor.
Yes, I do believe, according to the report, that he then had to take the elevator back down one floor to get onto the 32nd floor. But that is then when he was shot, and according to the police report, he reported that I've been shot and I'm on the 32nd floor. So presumably the police took the elevator up. There's no barricade at the elevator. So again, it appears to me there's a very open question as to why the police responded to the wrong floor.
No, and I agree with that. And apparently some person of management went up there also to observe the door before they decided whether they were going to call the police. But you know what? I need to take one thing. If it were me and I was taking my team to the 32nd floor to a potential barricaded subject, I wouldn't have let the door open on the 32nd floor. I would have got off a couple floors down and gone up, or a couple floors up and gone. I wouldn't have gone up because I wouldn't want to risk on the elevator having that door open and me facing the threat right there. I'd want to deploy my team from at least one floor down or two floors down going up the stairs.
Well, but you've also learned that the 32nd floor door is barricaded, though, from the stairs.
They can breach that door. Yeah, we can breach that door. They carry the tools to breach a door like that. Well, I don't know that team does. I've not been on that team, but we always had the tools to breach a door. That's not a problem.
So a couple other things that struck us as odd that I'd love to hear your thoughts on. I believe it was 5 officers that were there when they breached the door. And this is, again, as we discussed, over an hour after the shooting had stopped. Why only 5 officers? Does that sound like a low number to you?
No, it doesn't, because you're looking at one hotel room. There's a point beyond which too many people become too much. So we always, just not to get too technical, we always did things in basically 8. So you have a 4-man entry team, a team leader, a breacher, a medic, and a 4th person. So Generally, the breacher doesn't go through the door. The breacher comes up to do the breaching and then falls back in line, and sometimes doesn't even enter the room, depending on how big of a place we're trying to do. But if you're doing like a 2-story house, you need 2 teams at least. But if you're doing a hotel room, even a suite, you don't really need to get too many people flooded in there. And it's really important to get everybody through the funnel. You've heard the term fatal funnel. If they're in that doorway, after the first, third, fourth person come through, anybody in the room has a time to react. So I would have probably dumped one team into that room. I don't think that's a problem.
A team consisting of how many officers?
Probably 4 officers and a team leader.
Even though you really have no idea what you're going to encounter, you know that an hour prior, about 1,000 bullets rained down on the crowd, and you have no idea what you're going to encounter in there, how many individuals are going to be in there, but still you believe 4 to 5 officers is all you need. Yeah, because these things are really fluid. So once you get in there, and I've done this before where we've got in places and we go so far that we can't go any further with just the one team. So we'll call up the second team and then just deploy on further from there. So I don't know the circumstances. I haven't seen the SWAT report on it, but my guess is they had another team in the hallway. They were probably covering the other door. There were 2 entrances to that suite, and sometimes you might breach both, but that's a little risky depending on what kind of thing you're going to run into. So you're saying as long as there was a backup team on the floor, you'd be okay with it? I would, absolutely, yes. Yeah. And I'm not sure if that was the case or not. I'd have to go back and look at the police report on that. But let me tell you this. Yeah. If all you got 5 guys and somebody's raining down or just rained down all those bullets, we're going to go. I mean, if it would have been me and one other guy and there was still gunfire, we'd have gone. Yeah, but that's my point. This is all happening an hour later, though. So yeah, right. I get what you're saying. I just want to make sure it's clear. That I'm not waiting for anybody else if he's killing people. Yeah. Now, what about the fact that it was not a SWAT team? There was 2 of the officers, I believe, were members of SWAT, but it was not a SWAT team. Does that surprise you? Okay, this is a little bit deeper subject because I think it comes down to deployment of assets, and it's an issue that I think this illustrates a problem that has long gone on the Strip, and that is that the Strip is treated sort of like this anomaly. So we don't use standard policing practices there. We treat it a little different. A lot of people work in and out of there on overtime and that kind of thing, but we don't have police officers who are just on that beat. You know what I'm saying? They're those beat officers, and we don't have a SWAT team dedicated that I know of strictly to the Strip. So Metro has several SWAT teams, and however they deploy them is the thing. But I can say with absolute certainty, and I'm going to take this from 2 different directions. The first is, if all you got there in an hour is a bunch of patrol guys and a couple SWAT guys, we're going. If all you got there, you maybe you better train to have people there in under an hour, and maybe that's what it was right at an hour. But I'm a little skeptical about this because they used an explosive breach, and that's not something that would have been necessarily available to just a couple of SWAT guys who were conveniently there. Now, and don't get me wrong, it could have been, the breacher might have been one of the guys that just happened to get there first, and he grabs his stuff and up we go, and we can blow the door and go in. But that to me is a part of how the Metro needs to respond and answer your question. But as far as from a tactic standpoint, I don't have necessarily a problem with it. I just like to know what happened. Can the investigation, in your view, be considered complete without knowing what the motivation was for the shooting? Yeah, while motive is important, it's really important when you're trying to solve a crime or prosecute a crime. It's much harder to even grasp when the murderer is gone. So we see this in other cases that don't get this kind of publicity. When you have a husband and wife get in an argument and dad kills the kids and shoots himself, we'll never know why a person comes to that. We can speculate about, well, it was the divorce and whatever, but why would somebody ever come to that extent where they could do something so heinous? So there are crimes we solve and we write them off as solved Yeah,
particularly
we
where
do see
suspect's
those.
dead.
As odd as that circumstance sounds, unfortunately, we hear about that quite regularly, that situation where the husband kills the wife, et cetera. This situation is not one that we see regularly, thank God. And it seems to us highly unusual to have a situation like this and have someone supposedly go through so much planning, yet not to leave any explanation as to why he did what he did. Until we find out why he did it, how do we know what was really going on and whether he was the only one involved?
Well, and to really go to that point, we have to recognize that there are a lot of loose ends that aren't explained that may tend to lead one in a certain direction with regard to motive, and whether that has something to do with beef with the casino, or whether it has to do with depression over whatever gambling or whatever. I'm just throwing those out there, a couple that are talked about. But there's little bits of evidence, little trails that lead in some of these different directions. And so we need to know what the dead end was. Why didn't, let's say the fact that his hard drive was missing out of his computer, why doesn't that lead to some other speculation? We need to, and if there is no answer, then just say we didn't figure it out. But I guess a better way to answer your question is, this shouldn't be considered closed until the answers are given as to why things were muddled, why the communication was so bad, and what is our best understanding of the progress of this, how it went, who was involved, and how it resolved at the end. As long as we're still trying to figure out whether or not there was an accidental discharge or the guy was shot, we're having a little bit of trouble coming to closure.
I'm glad you mentioned the hard drive. That's been a very curiosity to us, because clearly he wouldn't have brought a computer into the room that didn't have a hard drive in it. I believe the report is that the computer looked damaged. In other words, it was kind of broken open to take out the hard drive. But at one point, that hard drive clearly, in my view, was in the room. Where did it go?
Yeah, and I'm the one that posed the question a second ago, so I wish we had some idea. Now, that may be something they can't solve. It certainly may, but there are other things. That's just one of the sort of loose ends. So taken in totality, there's got to be a better explanation. And maybe what we need to do is just a complete review of this whole thing. Because sometimes people are too close to the problem. Maybe we just need to, bring somebody in and just do a complete, thorough look at this entire thing.
Let me ask you,
start to finish.
If you became the new sheriff, irrespective of where the investigation was at that time, let's say it was concluded, would you reopen it?
I don't know that I would classify it as a reopened crime, but I would absolutely investigate this to the point where I could answer the questions as the public has of the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department, if they haven't already been answered before I get there.
What about the fact he had three cell phones were found in the room, yet supposedly he acted alone? That strikes me as odd. Someone with 3 cell phones, that means they are communicating with people and want to disguise that communication.
Well, there you go again. I've heard there's 2. So, yeah, that's problematic in and of itself. If he's got a couple even if they're all his, why is he carrying burner phones, and who's he talking to on them? If they were burner phones, I don't even know what. And that, to be fair, I don't even know that there were more than one cell. I mean, there's so much information out there that I don't want to discount something as misinformation, but at the same time, I don't know if I can lean credence to everything that I'm hearing.
Yeah. What about the coroner's report, where it reported his time of death as noon on October 2nd, when apparently the police report says that he killed himself on the evening of October 1st?
So I know the coroner, and I haven't spoken to him since the shooting, but and this is pure speculation, so I don't want this out of context, but we've had situations like this before where we go in, there's a person dead, we pull everybody out, we write a warrant for the room, When we come back in, then we do the investigation. CSI goes through and does their things. We don't generally call the coroner to actually come and place hands on the decedent until sometimes hours after they're killed. So there's a possibility that time of death is based on the fact that that's when the coroner actually got to examine the body and determine that he was dead. I'm not trying to give anybody an out, but that's reasonable.
But is that what time of death is supposed to mean, the time the coroner reviewed it, or is the coroner supposed to estimate, based on his expertise, when he believes the most likely time of death was?
I would hope that the coroner would put something in there regarding that. I haven't read, as you know, they all just came out and some of them are pretty heavily redacted. So I don't know for sure if that information's in there. But the coroner has to rely also on the police report. The coroner makes decisions about time of death often based on police information. So where that's really important is when you have a defendant, or you have an unsolved crime where you're going to go find a defendant, you want to prosecute him. It's really important to know when they died. So, it could be speculated that the coroner assumed that this guy, because of the fact that when we walked in there in the beginning, he was on the floor and he had a massive head wound and he was deceased, they really didn't matter. But that's a question I think you'd ask Coroner Freudenberg. I would ask him that question.
You mentioned
it's a reasonable question, absolutely.
You mentioned that the hotel casinos have to take primary responsibility for security, and for instance, when they found the blocked door, that should have been reported immediately to the police. There's a couple other things I think that people are questioning about how it was handled by Mandalay Bay. For instance, it's been reported that Campos was not an armed security guard. Is that something that you think needs to change?
That's the casino's business. They can determine what they want to do. But I can tell you something that I will change if I'm sheriff, and that is the idea that Metro cops are really not wanted to be seen walking around the casinos in uniform.
What about the fact that MGM is now talking to the police about either giving them that land where the concert was, or leasing it to them for some type of a training facility? Does the appearance of that concern you at all? That again, there may be some type of cozy situation here, or quid pro quo?
Yeah, we don't want to have an appearance of a quid pro quo, but at the same time, we want to make the Strip safer. I can tell you right now, my plan, if I were given that opportunity and it was vetted and people and the public believed it was a good idea and it wasn't an appearance of a quid pro quo, I would do it differently. I would make that an area command, and that area command would respond specifically to the Strip, and it would be officers who would all have beats on the Strip operating out of that building on the Strip. And if I wanted to co-locate that with some training facility, that's fine. The Metro has a SWAT training facility. They have a huge firearms training facility, and they okay. But my first priority wouldn't be to make that a SWAT place. My first priority would be to make it an area command, and I might potentially task a SWAT team to operate out of it, so that they could respond in their beat, in their area command, which would be the Las Vegas Strip.
Back to MGM's handling of it. According to the police report, 22 bags were brought to Paddock's room through the elevators. Doesn't that just strike you as something that should have been a huge red flag that would have been triggered at Mandalay Bay?
Well, it's my understanding that he brought those bags up the service elevator
with a bellman.
Which, yeah, and I've talked to people who work the industry, and it's kind of a no-no, And so the reason it's done, I guess, is because since nobody else gets to do it, people that spend a lot of money there get to feel privileged because they get to do it. But I can't fathom what the argument, or, I can't fathom standing next to him and having him have all these big bags and not ask him, what the heck are you doing? How long you plan on staying, or something, just in general conversation, if nothing else. And I certainly think it would have been enough to report it to supervision. And there is intelligence gathering staff, at Metro. I've supervised North Las Vegas police officers who've worked out of the Fusion Center, and we have people that respond directly to investigate those kind of things. They're just tips And really, no tip is too small. We send people out to try to figure out what somebody like that's doing with stuff like that.
Well, and Tim, this is happening at a time when there's 22,000 people directly across the street from the hotel at this event, and it doesn't appear that any extra heightened security was in place at Mandalay Bay.
Well, and so that leads to something that we've discussed here in the past with regard in law enforcement summits, and that's the fact that this kind of an incident can happen. So it wouldn't have only been Mandalay Bay that should have been on a heightened level of security, because there's overwatch or overlook vantage points in other hotels that could have done, would have had the same opportunity to rain down this death on these people who are just concert goers. So it's a broader issue than just Mandalay Bay's responsibility. This is really, and I hate to do this, but I kind of keep changing over towards what can we learn and do better, because we cannot change the past, but we're going to be destined to relive it if we don't learn something from it. And that is absolutely, that to me is the most important reason these questions have to be resolved, because how can we learn from something when we don't even know what the lessons are?
Well, in hindsight being 2020, wouldn't you say that Metro should have had snipers on top of buildings in light of the fact that there was 22,000 people below these hotels?
Yeah, I think those all have to be on the table, and the hindsight is 2020. We didn't have it then, so it's not really the question of why didn't we then. The question is, what are we going to do going forward? Because, Mandalay Bay has a beach venue that's outside below that you can see from two arms of the hotel and the Delano. There's other venues that are outdoor venues that, and not just on the Strip, but in other places in Las Vegas, downtown. So these things have to be taken into consideration. So I don't consider you to be in any way out on the edge of anything to say, what about snipers? I think that has to be part of the conversation. But we need to know what happened.
How can someone today feel safe going to a similar type event in Las Vegas if changes haven't been made?
Well, they don't, and that's why they're not there. That's why we're walking through the hotels, and at 7 in the evening we walked through the hotel, and there were two tables open. And by 9, it was a little better, but it used to be you go through Mandalay Bay and you kind of had to go as far away from the tables as you could, because you couldn't even walk down the aisles there.
But I'm talking about any future outdoor music festival in Las Vegas. At this point, would you say that no matter where it is along the Strip, at this point it should be canceled until further notice?
Jim, what I'm saying is, until we get a handle on this, there's not going to be people even inside these hotels. So we've got to give them that peace of mind. And if it means we have to have a reaction team all the time, and that reaction team is going to be made up of, designated marksmen and entry teams, and everybody's going to be on watch, the argument is against it. There's always something happening in Vegas. There is. So let's protect it, because people are coming here and they're spending money and they want to have fun, and they're not going to come back until this is put to rest. And the way we do that is to diagnose what happened and do some of the things you're presenting right now. And if it means we put designated marksmen on buildings to give overwatch for an outdoor event, yeah, we'll do that. But it isn't my say right now. Somebody needs to ask the sheriff what he's done to make it better. Because quite honestly, I don't want to give away every single tactic that we use. But at the same time, I want people to trust me enough that if I say, listen, we've put things in place to deal with this, that they look at you and say, you know what, I believe this guy.
The police department, under Lombardo's direction, recently issued its homicide numbers for last year. Incredibly, the 58 shot and killed that night were not included in the total.
I think it's disrespectful to the 58 people that were killed to leave them off of that. And
how could that have happened? And why did that happen?
Well, I can't say why it would happen, because I wouldn't do it. This isn't a 9/11 situation. It's not a Sandy Hook situation. This is a Nevada adult who went on the Strip and killed a bunch of Nevadans and people visiting Nevada in Nevada. It's a local law enforcement jurisdiction problem that has to be addressed by us. We can't blame it on the FAA. can't blame it on not having a Homeland Security Department. We can only blame it on it happened because we didn't have the resources in the right place. And now that we're looking back, let's figure out where they should be in the future. And we should not only look at how to do it on the Strip, we need to do it on schools, and we need to do it on schools today.
Would that have been
right now?
Would that have been Lombardo's decision to not include them in the total?
Absolutely, yes. He said it is. He's on record saying that they don't want to say it. I take that back. I don't know if he said it personally or if it just came out of his staff. But they don't want to consider it because other places haven't, and we're not required to by FBI rules. But I know the Las Vegas Review-Journal reporter went to the FBI and asked, and that's not the case. But some people fudge UCR. There's a uniform crime reporting responsibility for all agencies in the country, and it all goes to the FBI, and they collate that data. So, but they're self-police. The FBI does not go and dissect people's UCR numbers. Now, it's my understanding that they counted the 58 in the UCR numbers, but they're not counting it in local stats to show that the crime rate has gone down by 0.9%.
And ISIS claimed responsibility. What do you think about that?
Well, I think that's pretty common. They try to jump on about anything, so that probably doesn't have a whole lot of credence. The Saudi Arabian connection, the prince living in the other wing of the hotel where I stayed, and all of that. I've heard it all. I don't see enough evidence to really say that that's what happened. But I think we need to start answering some of the questions, and then maybe we'd have a better idea if any of those things are potentially true. I don't believe the ISIS thing at all. I could say that.
But you think there's information that the police have and the FBI have regarding motive that has not yet been disclosed?
I do believe there's a lot of things that haven't been disclosed, and I believe that because Metro's on record as saying there's still things that they can't disclose, and that the FBI has information that the county can't disclose. So, and I know with working with the feds many times, it's difficult to get through their bureaucracy and get information out of them.
Lombardo will likely raise 10 times the money of Bedwell in the campaign. But I think Bedwell has a good chance of winning. If you're a Clark County resident and paying even modest attention to the handling of this shooting, you have to be questioning the competence of the current leadership. But maybe it is not incompetence. Maybe there's something else going on. Maybe the FBI is playing a role behind the scenes that we have yet to uncover. When you hear what outspoken and controversial journalist Laura Loomer, who is writing a book on the shooting, has to say about this, you'll be shocked. Don't miss our conversation with her and more next week as we continue to seek the hidden truth behind the Las Vegas shooting. I'm Jim Breslow.
Thank you for listening to Hidden Truth, Las Vegas Shooter with Jim Breslow. Find us at hiddentruthshow.com and follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Hidden Truth Show.